Hello, hello. If I had to say what I'm known for my photography, it's probably that I have a very dreamy editing style, and I have very specific ways of how I achieve this without sacrificing the quality of my pictures. I have 5 different things that I do, depending on the picture, that help me get this dreamy effect, and I'm gonna go over all of them for you right now. Also, don't ask me why I hold my mic like this. I just like it and makes me feel like I'm like famous or something. Jumping into Lightroom, let's go ahead and grab a preset, put it on the photo, and use that as our base. If you need a preset, I got you covered. There's a free preset and a link down below, or you can look at my other preset packs. If you're not seeing anything that I'm seeing right here, make sure you're on the Develop tab. This first step is a very simplified version of the Orton effect, and if you mix this step with my dodge and burn technique that I touch on later on, you'll be able to achieve a very similar look without even having to open Photoshop. I know, pretty cool. Let's zoom in to look at these details. First thing I'm gonna do is drop the clarity just a little bit. If you do it too much, you can see how many details I'm losing. I'm gonna drop it just a tiny bit, and then I'm actually just gonna repeat that process with the dehaze, but with even less. For dehaze, if I'm putting it over an entire photo, I don't wanna go past like a -7, otherwise it starts to look a little bit too fake. Now I'm gonna add in a tiny bit of texture. This is gonna offset the blurriness that I just added, and honestly, doing all of these things does like a denoise effect on the photo and gets rid of some of the little tiny distracting elements that you don't really need. And lastly, we're going to go to masking. Hold down Option as you slide this up, and it will actually show you every little area that it's sharpening to make sure that you are just picking the areas that you want sharpened. All of these steps combined are allowing us to keep sharpness in the areas of the photo that we care about while smoothing over less important details. This helps us achieve that ultimate dreamy look. Moving on to my second technique, this is where I add either a radial or a gradient filter over my light source. The light's coming in from the left-hand side, so I'm going to go up to masks and go down to radial gradient. I'm going to create the mask over where the light is already coming from. You can play around with whatever settings you want here, but my go-tos are usually to increase the exposure and the highlights, also the temperature. I usually warm it up because light is warm. I'm going to drop the dehaze and the clarity. If you drop the clarity here, I wouldn't do it on the overall photo, otherwise it could look a little too much. Make sure that you keep these masks really feathered, otherwise it's going to look like this, which looks really bad. So keep it feathered, make sure that it seamlessly blends into the surroundings. Just to show you guys how much of a difference this actually makes, let's look at it before, and this is with the filter. See how dreamy that light looks? Because we want things to look natural, we need to make sure that we think about how light actually works. Haze gets thicker the further away it is. This means we need to actually subtract some of the closer areas out of the filter to make sure that it's only falling behind the subject. Now you can see that the mask is only in the background and isn't on my little person right here. If you don't want to go in and individually adjust each little slider that you've added to a mask, you can go to this slider here, which will increase or decrease the amount that the mask is showing up. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I am adding a quick linear gradient here at the top just to darken up the sky to give even more focus to the light source. Third technique, we're going to talk a little bit about dodging and burning. I'm going to do a really brief explanation because I'm actually putting out a full video on this. But basically what I'm doing is I am going to be creating 2 different brushes, one where I'm going to add to the light areas of the photo and one where I'm going to add to the dark areas of the photo. For the light brush, I typically will increase my exposure, raise up the temperature, and increase the highlights. I'm going to do an overlay so you can see exactly where I'm brushing, but I'm basically just following where the light already is to just make it pop a little bit more. I'm using a very feathered brush because, again, I want the photo to appear really dreamy, and this will blur the lines between the shadows and the highlights and make the whole photo look really soft. I will warn you that this can look really bad if you overdo it, but this is really how a dreamy effect can be achieved, is by making sure that the shadows and the highlights kind of feather together. For the second brush, I'm going to drop the shadows and the exposure a little bit and do the exact opposite of what I just did, and making sure the whole time I'm feathering the light into the shadows so that it's very smooth. This is what it looked like before we did all the masks, and this is what it looks like now. Sometimes if you layer all these steps on top of each other, it'll be too much. So before we go into Photoshop, I'm going to delete the radial filter. I better not lose a bunch of you to the Photoshop is scary mindset. These steps are so easy and will make your photos look really good. You should always make sure to duplicate your background layer before you start anything in Photoshop to make sure that you save the original. Technique 4 is what I use when I'm trying to add some flat haze into my photo to give it an overall soft look. Next, I'm going to create a new layer, then go to the brush tool, and I'm going to select one of the warm colors from my picture and brighten it up. Then go up to the top and drop the opacity before you start brushing. Where you brush is up to you, but remember that haze should be thicker in the distance and lighter in the foreground. To blend this in better, we're going to go over to the blend mode and change it to soft light. That before and after is looking good. I'm now running into that same issue that I had in Lightroom where I want to get some of the haze off of my subject to preserve some details. So I'm going to select the subject, clean it up a little bit, and we're going to create a new layer. To create a new layer, you have to hit Command J, and then you're going to drag that new layer above the haze layer so that you can make sure that it's sitting on top. You can then change the opacity of this new layer depending on how much you want it to blend in. If you're a better human than me, you'll name your layers. And there you have it. Now we've added some beautiful haze into the photo. And now we can move on to my absolute favorite step, which is the Orton effect. I want to work on just one layer, so I'm going to duplicate the 3 layers that I just created and merge them together. That way I can always go back if I need to. This is essentially my new background layer, so I'm going to duplicate it. I'm caving and I'm naming the layers. At the top of the screen, go to Filter, then go to Blur, and then select Gaussian Blur. I have a camera that has 64 megapixels, so I can go up pretty high. If you have something lower, like a 24, I would cut this number at least in half. At the top of the screen, go to Image, Adjustments, and then Brightness and Contrast. I usually put both of these somewhere between like 50 or 70 depending on the photo. It's gonna look really bad, but trust me. Go ahead and hit OK, and then we're gonna go over to the opacity and change it to somewhere between 15 and 20. Let's zoom in and see the before and after. This has the Orton effect, and this is without. It gives it such a nice glow, but we are losing some details. So let's duplicate the new background layer, move it above the Orton. After you name it, we're gonna go up to the top, go to Filter, Other, High Pass. I usually have this number between 6 and 8. If you have a smaller megapixel camera, I would go for 3 or 4. After you hit OK, go down to the blend mode and change it to soft light. This is such an important step, so don't forget it. It will allow your photos to be really dreamy, but still be very sharp. Let's do one more side-by-side comparison to take it all in. As per usual, let me know if this is helpful for you, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Ow. Gosh, I need a new chair.